I'm Dave Reilly. Welcome to What a Relief. What we're going to do is continue what we started on the last issue, the carving on wood turnings, and do a project that requires a little more technique than the simple carving that we did last time. Now, the one we did last time is this simple little bowl with the carved decoration all on the inner side. The project we're doing this time requires a different technique. Now we're going to do a full relief carving of leaves on the side of this turned vase. The wood we're going to use is butternut, carves very nicely, but it also looks like walnut. So the first step we're going to have to do is think about our design. Now, the design for this is a little more complex. To draw it out on a piece of paper may not work as well as any other. So what I do for these, I make up a mock-up using clay. Now, I've talked about using clay very frequently in all the other issues, and it's really a very important thing to have. You will have a three-dimensional object to use as your sample for your carving. Now, what I do is I will make rough sketches to determine what I think it's going to look like, but then I will make these leaves, just stick them onto my wooden dummy here, and then arrange them until I get a satisfactory arrangement. Then I can go and use it as a pattern for the carving. So let's do a little bit of clay work before we start, and then we'll continue. Now, the clay that we're going to be using is the typical modeling clay that you find in the craft stores. This is the type of clay many of you have used in grammar school for your little projects. What I want to do is flatten this out so that I can cut out my leaf pattern using my little cardboard pattern here. I've selected a thickness of about 1/16 of an inch, so I've simply ripped off 2 1/16 inch or so strips to lay on either side. And then I cover it with a piece of plastic so that my rolling pin won't stick to the clay. And then it's just a matter of rolling it out using those strips along the side as my reference. This is another example of some of these important skills you learned in grammar school or preschool are finally paying off. Now I have my strip to the thickness I want. I'll take my pattern, just a piece of cardboard. And the leaf is no particular leaf, it's my generic leaf. You can do any adjustment and change when you actually apply it to your mock-up. And I have room here for 2. Take the waste clay that's left over and roll it up, and you can continue using it. This is the type of modeling clay that does not harden, so that you can use these over and over for all of your projects. I really think that clay, for a carver, if they're doing a wide range of work and doing a lot of original work, is one of his most important tools. Now we have our 2, at least by definition, leaves. I'm using a plywood block covered in melamine as my board. The clay sticks to it nicely. Now I have my mock-up, and then it's just a matter of applying the clay leaf in some fashion that just appeals to you. If you don't like the way it's done, you can just peel them off. You can make a change. You can twist and turn the leaf. And then after a period of time, changing and manipulating and studying it, you'd be ready to do the carving. I suggest once you do this, let it sit for a few days and then come back to it and look at it again with a fresh eye. you may want to make some changes then rather than doing it immediately. Now I have ready my turned vase. I'm not going to go through all the details of the turning. The material is butternut. I have a waste block glued to the bottom. This is to hold it in the chuck for the turning, and also holds it for the carving. One thing to remember, as I mentioned in the previous issue, leave plenty of material for your carving. Here I have a lip of about 1/8 of an inch. This will simulate the thickness of the vase, but then the rest I have thickened out to about 1/4 of an inch to do the carving. So now, using my model as my reference, I can start and draw in where my leaves are going to go. I like to use these fine marking pens. They dry so quickly the ink doesn't penetrate, but it leaves a good permanent line for you to carve to. So it's a matter of just coming in and drawing them out. What the clay model does in particular, it helps you to determine which leaf is really going to be on top of the other leaf. This is all pretty much freehand. You don't have to be, unless you want to be slavish to your other design, you don't have to be too concerned. Here I have one leaf going underneath the other. It's an idea to just to make yourself some reference as to where it's going to come out, because your eye would notice any error in that. And then we can have one in here. And now it's completed. We don't have to concern ourselves as yet with any kind of a center line. You don't have to draw these things in, because as you carve, then you'll know exactly where it is you want to put them. So now the next step is simply to start our carving. Now we have the turning mounted on our chuck and on our adjustable chuck holder that there's drawings for it in the previous issue. This is such that you can move it at any angle. You can rotate your carving to suit your needs. So look in the previous issue and you'll see the sketch for that. One thing to note is that in this design, the leaves appear to go all the way down underneath the carving. So when you do your carving, you will take the carving right all the way up virtually into this waste block, so that when you're finished and you clean up the bottom, you'll have this rounded effect as though the leaves are going down underneath. Now the selection of tools is fairly simple. We don't have to use very many tools. One of the primary ones you're going to use is the carving knife. This was going to be to form this stop cut to separate each leaf, and then the gouges will be used to clean off the waste. So you can start virtually anywhere. I'll pick a spot here that is fairly uncomplicated just to start. So I'll just take it right from the bottom, bringing my knife up. This ridge here represents the top of all the leaves. And I will do each one. This is butternut. It carves beautifully. It carves almost like basswood, but it has the appearance of walnut. In fact, it is sometimes referred to as white walnut. Now here I have separated this particular leaf. I will use this. This is the number 6 gouge, just to start the shaping. I'm using this as essentially as a form tool. to define the shape of the leaf. Now that I have that done, I can come in here with a very handy type of tool. This is a Skew Gouge. This is very shallow, a number 3, but it's skewed, and it's wonderful for getting in to areas such as this to start and clean out this area in here. I like to do this first so that I have clearly defined the depth of my carving. These do, however, require having a right and left-handed one. Unlike an ordinary skew chisel, where flipping it over, you end up with going from right to left and left to right. But this will clean it out. If a piece doesn't come out, be sure to cut it out. Don't try to break them out. All that's going to do is give you a torn edge, which is going to be very hard to repair. You can use the knife to get in here and peel. You're defining the edge of your piece here. What I have found in doing these, instead of finish this out right to this edge, I leave a little bit so that when I'm all done, I could come back and blend them all together at the same time. Again, for the sake of consistency. There's a lot of pick up, put down of your tools. Don't try to do everything with one tool. You're going to want to switch back and forth. This type of a skew is particularly nice. It can be done with others. The one thing about carving tools, different tools can accomplish the same thing, so don't feel that you have to go out and buy a particular tool just because someone else has been using it. Now, if you're watching my hands, as I hope you are, I'm still following my rule of 3 points of support. Now, in this case, one is my tool. I have a finger on top of the tool to control it, and the rest of my hand is resting on the work itself, and there's my 3 points of support. I'm not doing this where I'm going to slip. I have complete control over what I'm doing. So now I have this shape here. I can continue down and using this wider gouge, wider just for convenience. Another advantage of having this waste block here, I can go down into it. If this were right up against my chuck, I could be going right into the metal chuck, and that is pretty disastrous as far as your tools are concerned. At this point, this leaf up in here, I can do a little of the modeling to get this little shape, this little curve, a little dip in it. Just enough to give it a little interest. This is another reason why I don't go really to full depth here just yet, just in case I have to make adjustments because of this curve here. To get the outside now I can start, since this leaf goes underneath this leaf, I will start to bring that down. Here I can use a flatter tool just to simulate the effect of going down underneath. again with these tools. 1, 2, and my hand is resting on my work. A good rule to follow is you either move the tool or your hand, but you never move both at the same time. That way your hand is always tight on your work to give you support. I have down in here now to cut this one and to cut this one. I will come in with a flat and start to nibble that work out. Good place for these tools here. This is another example of wait until you do the final detailing after all the bulk of the carving is done, so that you can do that at one session. Your carving then will have much more consistency. It's very easy to start and stop 2 or 3 times in a complicated carving, and then when you're all finished and you look at it, you could almost tell what days which parts were done. And you don't want that, but if you leave all the very, very final surface treatment until the end, you can do all that at one session and it'll have much more consistency. And that's really what we're looking at. So now I have this piece. And now we have our second leaf. You see, it's going to go pretty rapidly. And today I'm not going to do the entire piece because it gets very repetitious. Now I can just loosen this slightly, advance it a little, and this only has to be hand tight. It's remarkable how tight this can be become with just by hand tightening it. You really don't need a wrench unless this was a very, very large carving. Then you might want to tighten it up more, but for carvings of this size, hand tight is more than adequate. Now we get this piece. If the pieces don't come out, don't break them out, cut them out. Cut this one. And then come back. Your tools must be really sharp. Make sure everything is good and sharp, and pay attention to how they're cutting. And if you notice any deterioration, stop and tune them up, generally just on a strop, just to get that fine edge back. It's very easy to get so mesmerized by your carving that you don't realize that you're putting twice as much pressure on the tool to get it through the wood. You're not going to get clean cuts. You could slip, cut yourself, or even worse yet, damage your carving. Because you can heal, but sometimes the carving can't be repaired. Now we just outline that leaf. When you're cutting with the knife, instead of holding it very vertical where it can twist and start to wander, if you lay it at a fairly low angle, it'll have a tendency to track straight, and it'll follow very nicely. And now we just, since this is an undercut leaf, I'll start the undercutting. At the rate I'm going, I would estimate I have about an hour's work at least to get it pretty well finished. And then a little bit of time to do any final touch-up and detailing. So this is not a long-term project. Although I do suggest, if you want it by Saturday, I think I would not wait until Wednesday to start it. But as you can see, it's very quick, very nice and smooth. This one is going to be a little different. Let me turn that just a little. Where this leaf goes over this one. So this one is actually under this one and under this one. So now it's time to define this other leaf. Again, with the knife, my thumb is supporting it. I have my hand on top, so I really have 3 points of contact now, because you really need control. If the knife gets away from you, you're going to have problems. So now, my thumb is supporting it, my hand is supported. In fact, if you only have these small palm tools, this carving can be done entirely with this and a knife. Having the larger mallet tools is nice, but if you don't have them and you only have the palm tools, this would work out very, very well. I have no problem at all. And this is the process. This is really all there is to it. You can see, and now I have this one going underneath this leaf here. I will give it a little bit of texture, shape, modeling. Just be aware that you don't have a great deal of thickness here. So don't get too carried away going deep, because you still have to have some thickness down underneath. Here I have a little more modeling. As I commented, I'm not going to do the entire piece today. It's very repetitious. At the end of this, and I'll show you, it'll go back on the lathe, again into a jam chuck. A little different than the one that we had last time, which you'll see, to finish off the bottom. And then it's a matter of your finish of choice. Now, one other question remains, or one other little detail, is the veins that I have here going down the center of each leaf. Those can be done at about the stage where each one of these leaves are, and that takes a very small V-tool. And if you've done these before, you can run your little V groove pretty much down the center. If you're concerned about exactly where to do it, just pencil in a line. So there is my little groove to simulate the V. You can blend that a tiny bit with a nice flat chisel, or when we get to the point of finishing now, the question is, do I sand or not sand? I am inclined not to sand. I much prefer the tooled look. In fact, sometimes I will sand only to get a nice smooth curve, to blend some curves together. But I will then go back with a tool and tool the surface to restore that hand-carved appearance. When you're all finished, this area in here where it blends into the top of this vase, that's where then is the time to get that to blend nicely. So there's a smooth transition into it. But you don't want to do that until you're completely done. In fact, if you're going to do any sanding, a little bit of sandpaper just at that point so that everything blends together is sometimes really very nice. And then you want to sharpen up where these leaves come through. So now at this point, let me show you on the lathe how we fit this to a jam chuck. Now the final step is, assuming that we have completed the carving, is to mount this on a jam chuck so that we can turn and finish the base. As I said, I'm not going to do it today because the carving isn't quite complete. Now this jam chuck is just the reverse of the previous one, where that was a recess. We have turned a tenon that will fit inside of our vase, and that has to be nice and snug. And if done right, you can see it runs perfectly true. It works out very well. Then the matter of bring up the tailstock to support it, and then you can take a parting tool and cut part way through, finish it with a saw, and then, as I did in the previous issue on that shallow dish, I use this little wooden dowel just as a pressure piece, particularly on this type of a material, because it's sticking out so far. Any little catch of your tool, it's going to pop it off. And then you can go ahead and do your finishing, and then do your final sanding or any touch up and do your finishing. And then when that's done, you will have this nicely completed little vase. This has just a spray lacquer as the finish, both inside and out. The bottom, there's been a slight chamfer right here on the bottom to simulate how the leaves will go under. If they don't project far enough in, you can do a little touch up with a knife just to bring some of these edges below the level of the vase to simulate that these come up from underneath, and you will be finished. And that wraps up this technique. I'm Dave Reilly for Woodworking at Home.